Welcome to Behind the Build. I'm your host, Jonathan Jacobs. We are here with Vanessa Fong from Vanessa Fong Architecture. I've been looking forward to this interview for some time. Vanessa and I have known each other for a number of years now. We've worked on multiple projects together. And Vanessa's on the board with the OAA. She is heavily involved in multiple organizations throughout the city, while she also runs a very successful architecture practice. So Vanessa, thank you for taking the time to join us on Behind the Build today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I prefaced this to her by letting her know that there's nothing to prepare.
Yeah.
The questions are very ad hoc and it's conversational style. So I hope that everyone buckles up and gets ready because we're planning to have some fun. So I have started off a few interviews so far asking two questions that have nothing to do with architecture. And I think I'm going to do that again now.
Oh boy.
You're like, oh God.
Yeah. Oh boy.
I haven't asked this question to a few people, but I've asked it to others. So the first question is, what's your favorite color?
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. I think most people would say black.
Okay.
If they were to know me.
But that's not a color, it's a shade.
Exactly. So my actual favorite color is blue.
Blue. Okay.
Blue. Yeah.
All right. And what's your lucky number?
5.
5.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that was not Joe. Joe didn't say 5.
Well, who else has my lucky number?
It's mine. All right. Well, nonsense out of the way. I wanted to ask you, as I've asked many others so far and more to come, I wanted to understand from your own perspective, what led you into creating your own practice? At what stage of your life did you say, you know what, I want to go create architecture?
Yeah. Well, I didn't actually know I wanted to do architecture itself at the very beginning. When you're in high school and you're trying to figure out what university or college to go to and what to actually do with your life.
Yeah.
I was like, I want to go into advertising. I want to be a brand designer. And my parents, being Asian, were like, no, you must pick a profession. And so I was actually slated to go into biochem. I'd gotten a bursary from Queen's University. I was going to do biochem, and the August or the summer before starting university, I was like, what am I going to do with biochemistry? No offense to anybody out there who's in biochemistry, but I didn't know for myself. I was like, am I going to work in a lab? What do I do with this? And it was actually my art teacher who, at the time was like, you really should look into architecture. And
Interesting.
I didn't know anything about architecture.
And this is what grade?
This is grade 13 or OAC at the time, right?
For those that don't know what OAC is, if you're not from Toronto or you're from a different vintage, it was grade 13. It ended in 2005. 5 or 4?
Something like that. Yeah. So we're dating ourselves right now.
It's okay. We're not that old.
Yeah. But so very last minute, I did a switch. I'd gone into McGill for bio as well. And I asked to switch programs into architecture, and they had a spot free up last minute. So I found out 2 weeks before school was supposed to start that I was going to go into architecture. And so that started my trajectory into architecture. Yeah.
If there are any people out there that are biochemists that are listening to this podcast, can you please let me know if we've reached that demographic?
Yeah.
Just message me. Let me know.
I want to ask you what you do as well.
This is a learning process for two people involved. Okay, so you end up getting in 2 weeks before school starts.
Yes, exactly. It was very last minute. My parents were like, "What are you doing?" They do not like chaos, and I created that for them.
Had you already bought your books for biochem, or had you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't remember. I don't think we had done really anything, but I was slated into res and it was a whole mess, to be honest. But it worked out in the end, and obviously very glad that it did.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you go and you study this in undergrad. You go and you finish. You complete all your hours.
Yeah. Get licensed, and I think in the back of my mind, I always knew I wanted to start my own firm. That was something that was just oh yeah, I'll do that one day. It was kind of not even a discussion in my mind, but it was just something that I will do. Right. I didn't know when. to be honest.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I was like, oh, it'll be like later in my career, you know, when I'm more established at a firm, and then I'll go off and do my own thing. And I was working for Raw Design. I was a director there, and kind of helped start that firm up. And then, you know, got knocked up. So I had a bunch of babies in a very short amount of time.
That was the most subtle way of saying it.
Sorry. Sorry. I became pregnant with children. And to be honest, I didn't want to leave Raw. I really loved my role there. I loved working with Roland at the time.
Yep.
And enjoyed the studio. But I knew that I had, you know, basically 3 kids in a year and a half. And so just working the hours and the kind of like dedication that I wanted to put into Raw just wasn't even feasible at that time. So I think, you know, I had to make a decision that I think a lot of new parents or mothers specifically had to make. And so I said, you know, maybe this is the time. Idyllically in my head, I was like, oh, I'm going to raise my little babies and I'm going to work on like one project at a time and it's going to be wonderful. And so I kind of did that, but it was not one project at a time. It just kind of, I would say, exploded a lot faster than I anticipated.
Right.
So.
And what do you attribute that to?
You know, a lot of my colleagues, I think once I kind of put it out there that I was starting my own firm, all the projects that I got were referrals from other architects, past coworkers, friends and family. And so I really attribute the startup and the success of VFA to friends and family and colleagues, basically. Yeah.
I didn't ask you this question earlier, but I'm curious if we give a shout out to who is your art teacher? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I'm blanking on his name right now, but I can picture his face. Andrew Gregg.
Andrew
Mr.
Gregg.
Gregg. Yes.
Mr. Gregg.
Mr. Gregg. And Mr. Stushnoff was also one of my other art teachers, but Mr. Gregg was the one that was like, you need to do architecture.
Huh.
Yes. So shout out to Mr. Gregg.
Got to give it to him, right?
Yeah.
This is a catalyst for all of this. Thanks, Mr. Gregg.
Yeah.
Okay, so you go out on your own. You're picking up projects from friends and family and their friends and their family.
My dentist.
Your dentist.
My dentist.
How did tell me the story of how did you land your like I'm starting
Literally, I was like in the chair getting my teeth cleaned, and I remember them saying, "Hey, we're looking for a property to move into because we're growing, and we're looking into real estate to move our practice into. You know, would you be interested?" I'll be like, So my dentist was one who gave me one of my first projects as well.
What was the scale? What was the type of project?
So it was like a 3-story old office building,
Okay.
like kind of like a 70s build. And we converted into a dentist office and did a complete redesign of the facade and made it an accessible building because it wasn't accessible, and made it completely accessible for their clientele as well. So, yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. It's on our website if you want to check it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then at what stage? Sorry, actually, I haven't asked this question. So, what year is this that you start your own practice?
I started 2004. It's our 10-year anniversary this year, which
2014.
2000. Oh my God, what year? Yes, 2014. 2004. God.
It's like, damn, 20 years.
No, 10
Good
years
for
ago.
you.
Yeah. Which
This is 10
blows
years.
my mind. Yeah, we're gonna have a big party in the summer.
Wow.
You will get an invite too.
All right. 10 years.
Yeah, it's a big milestone in my mind for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, I remember I think first phone call I had with you
Yeah.
was probably about 6.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So it was,
Felt like a baby back then.
it was
for
new.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
okay.
Yeah.
So 2014, the whole thing starts. And what does it look like for you now? You're starting your own practice. You're getting these projects. You're acquiring projects while sitting in a chair. You're getting them while you're having dinner with friends and family.
Yeah.
You're wheeling and dealing.
Yeah.
And so at what stage do you realize, the capacity that I have in front of me is beyond what I can manage for myself?
Yeah.
At what stage do you realize that? How many projects did you have in front of you?
That was probably a couple months into, I actually remember distinctly, it was like the summer of 2014 where I was like, I was too stressed. I was like, couldn't manage it. I'm still, I still had young kids at home, trying to manage, figuring that out. And so I was like, I need help, right? I need help. There's not enough hours in the day. And so that's when I kind of hired my first Haley. I remember her, as sort of like on consultant basis.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't even sure. And I was scared, to be honest. I was scared to make that step to have to be responsible for somebody's paycheck. That was a huge thing for me to get over. But then once I did it, I was like, I should have done this like ages ago, because it was a realization that, once you can free up a little bit of your time, by hiring somebody else to pick up some of that work, you now have more time to dedicate to the things to help the business grow and help the business run.
Right.
And so that was a big realization very quickly, that it's okay to be uncomfortable with making decisions, but at the end of the day, it's probably for the best. Right. So, yeah.
And I one of the topics that we've talked about a few times with some guests is like, they do a great job in architecture school of teaching you about architecture. But what they do not do is give you an MBA in business.
Yeah.
Right? Like it does not exist.
It does not exist in architecture school. And it's something that's just so crucial for at the end of the day, you're a business.
Yeah.
And to be a successful business, you have to have business management skills. Right. And so it's been a learning curve for me. I have, and I think I'm still going to be doing it, but probably in one of the sort of lesser capacities as an MBA. So for the longest time when I was younger, like, in my 20s.
When you started your firm.
Yeah. Well, because I knew I wanted to start a firm, I was like, I should get an MBA, right? But MBAs classically are really geared towards a certain kind of like CEO of a big firm kind of capacity. Yeah. And to run a studio or a design firm, similar, skill sets, but also a little bit different, right? So I was actually talking to my girlfriends recently. I've looked at executive MBAs and also just like the core. There's kind of like core classes that you can take with U of T and stuff like that, which I think would be definitely beneficial for a business owner. And
don't they have accelerated programs now?
Yes.
Is that's what the executive program? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's skill sets that, yes, you can get by kind of like on the fly learning, but I think to really be able to like analyze the economy and understand where the economy is going and how that affects architecture as a business, like that for me is kind of like my next step in terms of like figuring out how to create a sustainable business.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people struggle with that. What is the right amount of projects to take on? What's the right amount of staff to be able to have in house? Yeah. Could you outsource anything? Like, it is not an easy path to try to figure this out. In most businesses, it's not. But specifically in this, when your license is stamped on the side of a drawing and you own all of that risk, forget the financial ramifications. We just talked about that last podcast too.
Right.
The financial ramifications are one thing. When your license is on the line on drawings, it's different. There's a different sense of risk.
For sure. Yeah. The liability, the risk factor, and like, how do you mitigate that? Right. Because there's a lot of exposure sometimes for sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So kind of danced on some of this, but so you take the practice from 2014, you hire your first employee, and then what does that growth look like in terms of scale of project? Yeah. And staffing? What does that look like for you?
So I remember, especially within the residential world, a lot of our projects at the beginning, I was essentially saying yes to everything, right? Like that kind of like mentality of like, oh my God, I don't know when I'm going to get the next project. So I'll say yes. And so it was like a basement renovation, like adding in a powder room and like projects like that. And I remember that I think it was a couple years in where we got our first project that was like above grade too. Right. And I was like, oh my God, we can like design a window. Like it was like a big moment.
Sunlight.
Yeah. And from there, I'd say it's been pretty steady growth over the first kind of like first 5 years, where it was like, okay, let's hire somebody else. We have the capacity to, let's hire one more person. And the projects also kind of would slowly scale up in size as well, appropriately. So it was nice. And I think, it was, when was it? Like maybe 2017, 2018. So a couple years in, where we got our first kind of like new build project, like Woody Crest, which we worked with Walden, and Cleaver House, like those types of projects where we became established enough that people, I would say, kind of took a risk on it for us to do their project, right? Like even as builders, to recommend a young firm is sometimes a risk in terms of, you're putting your own reputation on the line. And I have to thank people like that as well. The clients and builders and other kind of colleagues who kind of put their reputation on the line to recommend us, right? Or took the risk to hire us as a young firm to do kind of like larger projects.
So 2017, 18, you got your first new build.
Yeah.
And so you get to design all these windows, potentially even skylights. Skylights. Light from above. I had this idea of like, you have to apologize. We can strike this if you don't want it in, but we'll leave it to you. I was like, at the beginning is like vampire Fong architecture, right? Because you're below grade. Totally. Right, and then all of a sudden you can come into the light. It's like, oh no, this is subterranean stuff is past us now.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you start getting those larger scale projects. When we were talking before we started the recording, you were talking about how you just have landed your first like real substantial project in Forest Hill.
Yes.
And for anyone that doesn't know Forest Hill is a really long-standing established community within the heart of Toronto.
Yes.
Lots are large, homes are large, and architecture within that community is generally very traditional.
Yes.
They are breaking through on some level of contemporary and modern design, but they're few and far between.
Yeah. It definitely feels like a milestone. Like we literally just got in. We're just going through schematic design of the project. So I'm not going to get into too much of the details.
I don't want you to.
Itself, but it did feel like a big moment for me. I actually found out we got the project. I think it was on the 22nd of December. So
going into the holiday
season, it was huge on many levels. Because the state of the economy right now is a little bit in flux, so it's always scary starting a new year. Financially, you're not sure what's going to happen. People start to pull back in January. Nobody wants to spend money on January, so that was huge. As well as being in Forest Hill, which and I don't know if this is my own bias of it, but it feels like architecturally maybe an insular community. Like a lot of architects do really amazing projects in that neighborhood, but not a lot of new architects necessarily get hired within that community sometimes.
And to reference that is to say new architects, even though they've been around for a decade.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Or 15 years, it's not as standard.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, I mean, when we first talked about that, I had like a big smile on my face. I was like, this is what an achievement.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It feels like a milestone for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So I feel very lucky doing a new build there. Fingers crossed, everything goes smoothly. And just very kind of, I guess, have a positive outlook on kind of the trajectory right now. Yeah. Okay.
So we go from then till now, the most like current large scale, very exciting project. Yeah. I also know that you've really tried to take your business and you've tried new things with your business, which I think a lot of people don't do. So what have been some of those things that you've pursued? Some of the either passion type projects or business ventures?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've always been interested in terms of architecture is the symbiotic relationship of construction and design, right? Architects can have design ideas all day long, but if they can't actually physically be built, it dies within your head or dies within a sketch, right? Yeah. The reality of it is great builders need to be able to build it as well, right? And sometimes it does feel like there's kind of like a disjunction between the construction world and the kind of like architectural profession. And so to me, it's like, how can we bring that relationship to become closer knit, or to be a little bit more, I guess, in line or level with each other. And so, I've, I guess, attempted in different ways to look at that, and almost as like R&D for VFA is Yuki Homes, right? Yep. Taking, the laneway garden suite typology and seeing how can we make good design and good architecture more accessible and I guess easier to build in some ways for to create more housing.
Okay.
Right. So Yuki Homes looks at pre-designed models that can kind of shrink or widen to fit different lot sizes, and have it kind of pre-engineered from a structural and mechanical point of view, as well as a panelized kind of like wall system, so that it can kind of come onto site and be erected quicker than traditional routes of, bringing sticks of lumber and then like having somebody hammer it on site.
Yeah.
Right? So what it's trying to do is like create more accessible housing, right? And doing that by having it kind of like pre-designed, but still designed at a high level. And then also by reducing the kind of like on-site time, which is your most expensive time, right?
Right.
So that's been really great in terms of like research, in terms of like wall assemblies, really tight wall assemblies. How do you bring panels together and have them like gaskets to create still a very tight thermal and air barrier, and working with good trades who also want to advance technology or advance the building aspect.
Which is a challenge.
Oh my goodness.
Finding the right trades that I can actually see the world beyond their nose is very hard.
Yeah. I think, I can't remember where I read this, but I think besides farming, construction is one of the industries that have not advanced in the past 50 years. Like it's just, we're still building this exact same way we were 80 years ago, right? Like the kind of technology, like maybe your tool is a little bit more automatic, but like we're still literally hammer and nail, right? And I think there's so much more to the construction industry that it does come down to the people wanting it to change. And that was actually a learning lesson. It's like that. It's an uphill battle for sure.
I mean, I could tell you that we've spoken to some companies nationally, but also internationally about changing the way the construction happens. And, we were looking actually to hopefully put that forward on an upcoming project. But we're not here to talk about us. So,
no, but that as a concept, I think is really important, right? As an industry, it has to almost come from, as the designer or the architect, we can have the ideas to want to change it, but without having, the construction managers and your associated trades on board as well.
Yeah.
It takes a team effort, right? And like for everybody to be on the same book and wanting to be reading on the same page at the same time.
Right.
And that to me has been probably the biggest hurdle around that, right?
Well, in establishing this was you established this division of your business at the same time, because I know that you were involved in understanding when this was going to come to fruition in the city of Toronto.
Yeah.
But you established it around the same time that they actually made it bylaw, right? That you could go build a laneway house or a garden suite.
Exactly. Yeah. It kind of came out of the frustration of doing our first laneway house with the city of Toronto, where we basically were in talks with the city to approve this laneway house. The laneway bylaw hadn't been in place yet.
Right.
And they were basically like, hold on. We're looking at laneway housing for Toronto. And so because we already had it pretty much designed, we were one of the first laneway houses to be approved, to have a building permit in Toronto.
Do you remember what year this is? Is it 16 or?
16 or
17?
Something like that, I think.
Okay.
17, yeah. We designed in 16 and
built in 17.
In 17, we got approval, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I say that because I think that the ultimately the approvals with the city to allow this to happen on a more frequent basis without having to jump through the hurdles you did.
Around that time? Yeah.
Was it around that time? I think it was actually a year or two later, wasn't it? I think it was like 2000, just before the pandemic.
2019? Yeah, something like
right?
that.
I think it was like 2019 or something like that, where the city then ended up allowing. I would look this up afterwards.
Yes, we'll verify these days. But it all happened around the same time, basically. Like basically, they approved the laneway bylaw, and then they gave us the building permit,
right?
Because we had been working with the planner about like what is it that they wanted Toronto's laneway bylaws to look like as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And obviously Lanescape was kind of really pushing as well at the same time. So yeah. And so because that process was so frustrating, and even from the client experience point of view, that process was so frustrating because for a laneway home, you still need to hire, the architect, the mechanical engineer, the structural engineer, like all the
maybe
same
geotech.
as building a full home,
right?
But it's a small home, and the city's goal is to create more housing more easily. And I was like, this process doesn't allow for that. So that's where Yuki Homes came in to be like, how can we make it easier for the client to put up a laneway home? Right. If it's easier for the client, there's more willingness to do it, and then which then will propel to more housing.
Right.
I think easier said than done, because it's still expensive to build a laneway home at the end of the day.
Yeah, and there's also certain charges that you get hit with in being able to do it. And you have development charges, right, on your drains.
Development charges you can now, I think, defer.
Oh, you can.
So yeah. But yeah, it's still, I think, everybody's hopes at the beginning of how easily these things would be put up and how many of these would get put up in the city of Toronto. There's definitely not the numbers that everybody projected,
right?
Or not the pace maybe that everybody projected. It's starting to pick up. The other side of it is the real estate market recognizing the value of a lot that has a laneway home on it, right? Because at the end of the day, it's got to equate to a value. Yeah.
And you're involved, we had mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but you're involved in the OAA.
Yeah. So a number of years I was on the board of the OAA as VP of communications for about 4 or 5 years. And then now, I'm on the complaints committee for the OAA as well. So I really enjoy being involved in a voluntary kind of capacity with the OAA or other kind of volunteer groups, just because I feel like the profession or the business of architecture can kind of be a bubble sometimes, and to keep my mind kind of expanded to other facets of the profession is important. And also to give back a little bit, to me is always an important component, right? Yeah.
And do you feel like it has given you, in some ways, potentially an edge in understanding like what's upcoming and changes, how to manage your business a little bit differently based on what you're seeing? Oh,
for sure. Especially being on the complaints committee.
I was going to say, well, I mean, the transition of going from communications is a completely different C than complaints.
Yes, definitely.
And are you fielding complaints from practices? Or are you fielding complaints from like homeowners or neighbors?
It can be anybody who basically has a complaint about a licensed architect or a business of architecture. Yeah. So it can be from anybody, really. The general public. I mean, though it's in place to protect the public,
right?
At the end of the day. So a lot of it is complaints from clientele or,
neighborhood associations.
Yeah. Or, homeowners or, people who've been dealing with an architect typically. But it also, is a way to keep architects in check, right? We're a self-regulated profession.
Yeah.
And so it's to make sure that we're doing it within the public interest.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I'm absorbing like what that could look like.
Yeah. I'm not privy to say.
How many people are on that division or within that division?
Committee?
Yeah, that committee.
I believe I can't remember the exact number, but around 10 of us.
Okay.
Something like that.
And all of people that are involved in that committee are all active architects.
Yes.
They are.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You have to, yeah, you're a licensed architect still. Yeah. And obviously if there's, cases where there's a conflict of interest,
I was going to say,
obviously you would bow out of that case.
like what happens when like someone calls in and they say, I've got a complaint about Vanessa Fong Architect.
Yeah, I'd be like, I'm out, guys.
Oh, well, let me hear.
Yeah, but it is like eye-opening, I think.
Yeah.
To kind of understand different ways that people converse about architecture as well, and like the kind of like things that the ethical line right can become blurred sometimes. And in any dispute everybody thinks they're right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of up to the complaints committee to be kind of like distill it to be like, okay, what was professional misconduct versus like not, or just being unhappy.
Yeah. So in some ways it's like mediation.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah.
I was going to say, you didn't think you were going to go for a law degree, but yet here you are.
Yeah.
We'll do the MBA. We'll get a little law degree, run the practice.
Yeah.
Okay, so just from understanding, like from a time perspective,
Mm-hmm.
so if you're involved in that,
Mm-hmm.
what does a time commitment look like from you on like a weekly? Is there do you dedicate a certain period of time in your week to dealing with that committee?
I think when I was on the board, it was definitely a larger time commitment. There'd be I'd say definitely several days a month that had to be like full days, in meetings or in committee meetings and stuff. With the complaints committee, it's a little bit based on the number of cases that come in.
Okay.
So there can be some months that are a little bit heavier, some months that are lighter. So it kind of like can go up and down. Yeah.
And so how have you set up your practice to operate with you potentially on some days having to deal either with the communications previously or now dealing with the complaints?
Yeah.
What does that look like? So do you have, what are the roles within your practice to help facilitate that for you?
I have really good staff.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the practice is nothing without my colleagues, and I'm lucky enough that I have people that are really dedicated, love what they do, and I can rely on them to kind of run a lot of what VFA does now. I say that now, it wasn't this case obviously 5 years ago or longer, but right now we have a really great team in place, and there are some days I'm like, I feel like I've made myself redundant at VFA. I'm like, anybody want me to look at anything? Because they're great, and they've been with me for a long time, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so they just know how to roll with things. They understand what the goals are for projects. They are great at handling client relationships. So I can really put my trust in them, and that is, I think, the key to my business as well.
So how many staff do you currently have?
So we're 10.
10 people, including yourself or plus you?
Including myself.
Okay, so 10 including you.
Yeah. 2 are interior designers, and then the rest are either licensed architects or architecturally trained and kind of in the internship process.
Okay.
Yeah, about to get licensed.
And you were telling me previous again to the start of this that you were focusing a lot more on trying to acquire the interior design of the house that you're designing as well. So what does that look like in your general sales process now? Like what?
So I think a couple of years ago, we'd always been kind of doing some of our projects. We'd do the interior design, and then slowly I think that just became more and more part of the process. So interior design, we always sort of did, I guess, as a group of architects, we always would, for maybe half our projects, we'd do the interior design component of it, right? And slowly and surely, it became just more and more part of our scope of work. And so I think it was during COVID, I was like, hey, like we're actually getting more and more inquiries because of an interior design portion of the work that we did on a project, right? So I kind of made an executive decision to be like, you know what, architects are great at design, but they're not interior designers, right? And the skill of a trained interior designer is just different from an architect and how they see space. So made my first interior designer hire. Claire, who's fabulous, and started intentionally looking at interior design from an interior designer's perspective and collaborating that with architecture. So now all our projects were sort of like all or nothing, right? So with potential clients, I say, we provide the architectural as well as the interior design scope of work. And so that you get, especially for residential, both the inside and out work cohesively together. And I think that's important, especially in residential, more so than maybe commercial or different typologies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been successful so far. Like we've, I think, really developed a more layered approach. And it's, I think the team working with architects and interior designers together just gives you a bit more of a fulsome end product at the end of the day.
Yeah. What I've found in what we do, just managing projects.
Yeah.
At the early inception is, your plans are going back and forth between an interior design firm and an architecture firm. And if they're separate entities, timeframes can be extended.
For sure.
And there can sometimes be potentially disconnect between what the interior designer is looking to have accomplished and what the architect's what their vision is from the early inception of the development of the project. And then there are those times when those two completely see it eye to eye. And there's no battle.
Right.
And when you have that internally, I feel like it really does help the progression of the project move in the right direction faster.
Yes, I would 100% agree with that. Like when we start up a project, both the interior design team and the architectural team are sitting at a table together with the client, and our initial design, I guess, meeting internally is with the entire team together so that everybody's on the same page from the very first day. And it's not like, okay, we have the architecture, now let's go to interior design. Like that process it just creates, I think, some tension sometimes, as you were mentioning. And it just kind of delays things in the long run.
It definitely can, especially if it's two firms that have never worked together before.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, at other times, you roll the dice. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you've experienced that, right? Like there were periods of time where you were focused more just on the architecture and you were working with interior designers on some projects.
And like that can be really great and fruitful as well, for sure. I think it is finding the right match. I think at the end of the day, for the client, it's finding the right match of your entire team, like whether that's architecture, interior design, contractor, your engineers. If they're all on the same page, then it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's when everybody's kind of in their own little world and not talking to each other or not kind of understanding what the client's end goal is, then it's just like,
no, there's no binder. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about practice. We've talked about projects. We've talked about interior design. We've talked about side projects. We've talked about school early on. I'm curious, with all of this, managing your 3 children,
family,
that idea that you had presented to yourself in 2014, saying, "I'll take on one project and go manage my kids." So what does that look like for you now, with all the other commitments you have? How are you able to find the balance with family?
Yeah, that's always, whoever was it that said, like, you can have it all? It's some days I'm like, I wish they never said that.
Well, I think wasn't it Tony Montana, the guy from Scarface, that said you can have it all? I don't think it ended well for him.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It was tough, especially when the kids are young. It was a whole lot of guilt all the time, right? If I'm working late or I had to take a meeting on a weekend or after hours, the guilt of not being home with them, or if I'm with them, the guilt of like just knowing how much work I had to do. And like the first couple of years, I ran myself ragged. It was very difficult. And there was a moment where I had to be like, you know what, I need to figure out what my priorities are. One of them became, I'm going to have dinner with my children every single night, or at least most nights. And so I gave myself a hard stop deadline each day so that I could get home and spend that quality time with them, because it's important, right? I kind of grew up in a family where my parents worked their butt off, and I probably saw my dad on Sunday mornings. Like literally I would not see him all week.
Right.
And so I wanted something different from that.
Mm-hmm.
So I made that decision. It did mean, beg the question of like, okay, how am I going to do this? And it comes back to hiring the right staff.
Yeah.
So hiring more senior, because I was hiring kind of really junior people at the time.
Right.
And taking the plunge to be like, okay, I'm going to hire somebody more senior. That means more money. But it will give me these other things. And I had to look at values like that differently, or like the kind of financial side of the business differently, because it gave me a certain value for my personal life. And, it was scary, right? To be like, oh my God, that's a lot of money that I need to be making. But at the end of the day, it came back to being like, okay, it gave me a happier life. I can again focus my energy on different things of the business, because this more senior person is now doing a lot more than, a junior person does. And it took stuff off my plate as well.
Right.
That in a nutshell, helped me kind of help balance things out. I mean, there's going to be days definitely where I have to go to a conference, or, I'm away, things like that.
That's going to happen no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. But also just, trying to remind myself life's short. Life's very short.
Hey, we dated ourselves with OAC. So now we.
Yeah. You don't know what tomorrow's going to bring,
Yep.
And so to, enjoy the process of it all is, for me, become super, super important for the last, I'd say, few years. That, yes, it's a business. Yes, it's architecture. Yes, it's clients. Yes, it's money. But at the end of the day, I'm always reminding myself, if I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, I shouldn't be doing it. Right. And I'm lucky enough that I've kind of built a firm, a group of colleagues who I really enjoy working with. And I truly actually enjoy the process of it all at the end of the day. So I think that's been kind of a huge driving force for me.
Well, so I will help you remind yourself of this. Mm-hmm. You told me this before.
Yeah.
You went away on a vacation.
I went on a vacation.
Right. And on that vacation, did you answer your phone?
No, I didn't. Well, the first couple of days I did, but then I didn't afterwards.
Right. I understand what shutting it down means. It means you're like 80% shut down. There's like a 20% you're probably going to have to answer. But I think getting to a stage of your career where you can actually shut it down and you can rely on the people you've put in place to be able to get their professional development. They get the sense of trust from you that they know that they're going to be able to do it. It's empowering for them, but it's also empowering for you.
Yes. Yeah. For sure. I totally agree. Like it's one of the, I was telling you, it was one of the first times that I went away for a week and I actually felt like I got rest and rejuvenated from that week, and not just kind of like stressed about what I was missing out on or like what decisions had to be made. Right. Yeah. It's a huge thing.
Are you still running?
I'm still running.
Yeah.
Chicago Marathon in October.
You're doing the Chicago Marathon.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Sounds terrible.
I mean, I haven't done it yet, so.
Marathon.
Yeah. So I'm still actively running and trying to stay fit.
And how often do you run?
I work out probably like 4 to 5 days a week. And that's split between like runs, like 10K runs versus like HIIT classes.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm a big fan of Barry's boot camp.
Okay.
And our whole studio actually just went and did Barry's boot camp in February.
I have no idea what Barry's boot camp is. Can you educate me?
It's like different rounds, and you have a treadmill and then you have weights stations. So then you do like a treadmill round, and then you do a weights round, and then you do treadmill round and a weights round. And so you kind of switch it up, and it's all like high intensity interval training. Okay. And it's addictive. You will come with me one day. It'll be super fun.
Oh. I renovated my house to be able to have the gym in my house. The concept of going to a gym, I'm like, I used to be a member of the gym, and I had such a tough time with it. You'd watch that person next to you not wipe down the machine, and then you want to go use them. I'm like, everyone's dripping all over the place. I'm like, I guess I sound like a germaphobe. It's not the case.
Yeah, COVID did that.
No, I like to go to the movies now, not wear a mask, or go to the grocery store and like just cough randomly. Just see what kind of reaction you're gonna get.
That's like, yeah. So it's crazy that was our life for a while.
Right.
As a side note,
I just saw
so nuts.
I saw a memory recently of a video of like what people were doing in public when they were going out when COVID first started, and like people walking around, like someone was walking around in a diving suit with the with the oxygen.
Yeah.
Like, what was going on?
Yeah, and like the whole world shut down.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to know that the entire world can shut down for extended periods of time. We just need to do that for good now. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you can channel that energy and that collective kind of like, what's the word? Like channel that collective energy for something good in the world.
Yeah.
Change can happen.
It definitely can happen.
Yeah.
The pandemic made us give up our office space. We all work.
Right.
We all work remote now. We get calls. People want to drop stuff off. We're like, no, we don't want your samples. We all work from home. Go give the samples to the architect or the interior designer. We don't need them.
Yeah.
And so you're gonna go run a marathon in October, which to me is wild. And
but you know what? I always say if I didn't run or if I didn't work out, my therapy bills would be really high.
Yeah. I
right.
feel the
Like
same
to me,
way.
that is my release. That is actually, I zone out and kind of like most of the time I figure out some sort of problem without knowing it by the end of the run.
Are you the kind of person that runs with earbuds in, or do you run without earbuds?
Oh. Are you going to judge me?
No, I mean, maybe. Yes.
I run with music on.
You run with music.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
no podcast while you're running.
No podcast, no.
Smart.
I don't want
Who wants to listen to a podcast?
in my ear?
And do you create playlists, or do you find other playlists, or do you go to an album that you like?
Yeah, it's usually an album of that time and moment, or some sort of like playlist, like some kind of like pump me up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you're listening to your music. Yeah. I know that I'm sticking on this topic of running just because I think
you're a runner too.
I had been running for quite a while. I'm out of love of running right now currently. I know. I just
talk to you anymore.
I've personally really struggled with it in the last like 9 months. I've gone out, I've done some runs, I haven't done a 10 plus K in a year. But
I'm
I'm
not enjoying it. You know what I mean? Like, it ebbs and flows.
I have to enjoy it because when you enjoy it, you run fast.
Oh my God. And it feels good.
Yeah. Selfishly, I was getting my times down to like the low 4s per kilometer. And I was really happy with that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's not like 3s, but it's not 5s. Anything with a 4 in front of it, I was,
pretty happy.
Decent.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay. And what about any upcoming future travels for yourself to help release that stress, go for a run elsewhere?
Yeah. So other travels, I'm going to Copenhagen for 3 days of design. So I've sort of like started to arrange travel around design shows lately as well, to keep inspiration high for me for design wise. Like Toronto's great, don't get me wrong, but like sometimes, looking more globally at design, and not just necessarily architecture, but like art and sculpture and interiors has been high on my priority list. So the last couple, trips I've taken have been centered around, Miami Design Week. In June, I'll be going to Copenhagen for 3 days of design, which I'm so excited for.
That's incredible. Never been.
Yeah. Well, my first time to Copenhagen too. So like not only from an urban planning point of view, but from an architecture point of view, from furniture, just like the influence there. Like I'm super, super excited for that. So
that guitar mount I'm pointing up to is from Copenhagen.
Oh, nice. That's beautiful.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. So that's kind of like my next big trip. Yeah. So.
And one of the questions I really didn't even ask you is who early in your career or now have you focused on, or whose work you've admired? Whether it's let's leave Toronto out of it potentially. Globally, are there any architects that you've admired from a young age to now, or in the last few years? And if you don't feel comfortable answering the question, just say, like, I got to give that more thought, and we can leave it.
Yeah. I wouldn't say there's one influence. Like, I think when I was in university, it was the days of Starchitecture, right? Like the Zaha Hadid, Leapskin, Foster. Like there were just like big names that were sort of really established globally. And that's what, Morphosis, like it's just like obviously we looked at them a lot. I think this day and age, because of my maturity now, or maybe because, Starchitecture isn't as quite a thing.
Yeah.
My influences actually come from different avenues, right? Like I'm kind of influenced more based on design thinking, or like the idea of designing for the senses or health and wellness, like those aspects, and how do you create a good design that I guess fulfills those aspects,
right? Rather
than kind of like jazz hands showy feeling of architecture. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that. I think I understand that.
Yeah. So I think, so my influences really come from, just creating spaces that from a human point of scale, actually at the end of the day feel good. And I know that feels, or maybe sounds kind of like odd, but it's beyond the visual, right? Yeah. Everybody experiences it with how a space sounds, how it feels thermally, the touch of everything. And so being more attuned to that, I think, has become more of an influence to me than other, maybe kind of like Starchitects.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Vanessa, honestly, thank you so much for coming and doing this, and having not heard any of the podcasts to date, and just taking a chance and saying yes to this. I appreciate it. It's been nice to catch up with you, which we haven't been able to do in a little while.
For sure.
And I think it was really interesting to just gain a lot of perspective of what your life has been over the last 25 years, and the path.
Thanks for having me. I think this is super exciting, and I can't wait to hear all the episodes.
Yeah, thank you.
While I'm not running.
We'll have to change that with Behind the Build.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks.